Okay, my friends, moving right along. Let's start off with the nervous system part 4. We're going to talk about the cerebrum, which is that part of the brain that really we think of, or the layperson think of. I mean, A and Pers, we know what the cerebrum is. Cerebrum is that main, large, wrinkled, ugly-looking part of the brain that is large and in charge. It's our computer processor. We're going to talk about the functions of the cerebrum and difference between somatic and motor pathways. Talk about some diseases as well. Diseases, God forbid. Big picture is that the cerebrum is the computer processor of this 1980s computer. Only our computers are 2016, my friends. Kicking ass and taking names. That central nervous system regulates the body. It integrates, remember that, integrates information. And that's key to our survival and our adaptation to the world as we know it. We are able, through the cerebrum, to integrate bits of information from all over, from our senses coming in, and we'll process that, and we'll make our decisions based upon that. That all happens in the cerebrum. All right, different lobes of the cerebrum. We've got the frontal and parietal and temporal and occipital. And in here there's an insula within that lateral fissure there, deep. All right, and here we have that depicted here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lobes for each hemisphere. Right and left hemispheres. The left lobe is going to receive and send information to the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere is going to send and receive information to the other side of the body, just the way it is. The cortex, take a look at it. That's like the outer aspect of the brain. There's the cortex right here. It's gray matter. Gray matter is comprised of cell bodies. So there's a lot happening here, a lot of processing that happens in your gray matter wrinkles here. And where those wrinkles are called, or rather the mountaintops, these little bumps are called gyrus, a gyrus, or gyri, plural. And then sulcuses, or sulci, those are the valleys. So peak, gyrus, valley, sulcus. Peak, gyrus, valley, sulcus. Cortex of the brain. Cell bodies. Medulla, the inner aspect, comprised of white matter. The connectome is all of the networks, the combined networks within the brain. All of those different circuits that are active, different illustrations of them. Here are the gyri and sulci, all the different lobes, and here are all these little spots, those little networks are happening. They're sending and receiving information, and these are all the neuronal pathways. It's called the connectome, the combined circuitry of the brain. Different tracks within the brain. We've got projection tracks, and they're going to send information different places. And association tracks, they're going to extend from one of these areas within a hemisphere to the next, kind of like little loops, because they're associated together, they hang out together. And then commissural tracks, right here, they're going to send information across hemispheres. So the most notable commissural tract is the corpus callosum, where a lot of axons are crossing the midline and making sure that the left side knows what the right side's doing, and vice versa. The basal nuclei are really deep structures. These are different named structures within the nuclei. There's the caudate nucleus and the lentiform nucleus and the amygdaloid nuclei. And this is these primitive structures in here. This is like the deepest aspect, the core of your brain. So a lot of your strongest emotions and nervous information, it likes to go in there very deeply. There's a very deep instinct that I have to like to be out in nature, or when I smell something that reminds me of a memory from my childhood. That's processed deeply in here. Our fears are processed deeply within the basal nuclei. So the basal nuclei in the center, here's a coronal view of what they look like when they're sliced a different way. They're going to regulate motor control, related to posture, different actions we perform all the time, repetitive movements, and they have some role in thinking and learning. Another fancy term for these structures deep within the brain, corpus striatum. Corpus means body. And this is going to be comprised of the caudate nucleus and internal capsule and the lentiform nuclei as well. Same structures, deep brain structures, what I want you to remember. Really, really important. Functions of the cortex itself. Remember, we've got the different lobes, different things happen in the lobe. Like frontal lobe gives us our personality, and it helps us process things day to day. And then we've got the central sulcus that cuts the brain in half from ear to ear. And in the front of that central sulcus, we've got the precentral gyrus. It's in like mint green here. And that precentral gyrus is going to help us process motor control. So it's going to allow the information to be sent out via that precentral gyrus, while the postcentral gyrus transmits sensory information. The occipital lobe is going to contain the visual cortex, where vision imagery is processed. Speech is going to be processed in this posterior inferior aspect of the temporal lobe called Wernicke's area. And there's another little area in the frontal lobe between the frontal and parietal areas, and that's called Broca's, and that's going to help us speak. This is where we hear things in the primary auditory cortex and the superior temporal lobe. So there are different spots within the brain, within the cerebral cortex, where they're going to be responsible for doing things, performing a function. Have a general idea of where they're at, what they do. This little guy is called a homunculus. It's like Spock from Star Trek. We've got the somatic motor cortex in the precentral gyrus. And look at all the things, if we were to take some sort of instrument and stimulate the motor cortex in this area, the guy's eye would close. And if we were to poke him right here in the motor cortex of the brain, he would have a tickle in his throat. Here, we prick his thumb. Whereas the sensory cortex, if we were going to stimulate this area of the motor cortex, the guy would have an itch on his cheek. So sensory, postcentral gyrus, motor, precentral gyrus. Here's a lateral look at him, where those structures are at. They're right alongside that central sulcus. The homunculus is a map. Here's a better look at it. So we've got the frontal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe, parietal lobes, insulas in there, precentral gyrus and the motor cortex, association area, motor cortex. We've got a little dividing line here, and this is going to be the sensory cortex. And in front and in back of those areas, so the blue is going to be the primary motor cortex, and the pink is going to be the primary sensory cortex. And around those areas, you've got association cortex. So they play a role in those functions, motor and sensory, respectively, but they don't perform it directly. They're like in support. Another look at it. Frontal lobe, occipital lobe, vision happens there. It's processed. coordination happens here, balance in the cerebellum. Post-central gyrus, sensory. Pre-central gyrus, motor. Deep within that frontal lobe, judgment. Thalamus. Basal nuclei. Deep brain structures. Here's the pons and the medulla and the spinal cord. Reflex centers. Consciousness is going to be mediated in the reticular activating system. This is going to be found throughout the medulla and the pons. Consciousness is defined as being self-aware, being aware of oneself, the environment, and other human beings, interacting with people. So the reticular activating system is very, very important. It basically makes you who you are. So you want this to be intact here. It's within the brainstem, and it's going to communicate via the thalamus, the reticular activating system. It's going to communicate with areas of the cortex to gather information on vision, on personality, on hearing, on taste, all these things. Integration of information. Language, we talked about Wernicke's and Broca's areas, two little spots in their areas of the cortex where language is going to be interpreted and speaking is going to be made possible. And interestingly, in the left hemisphere, so left side of your cerebrum, speech centers are going to be present here in about 90% of the population. So that's pretty interesting that they're almost exclusive to the left hemisphere. Aphasia is defined as a disease in speech centers. The inability to speak, articulate, understand. Talked about the deepest structures within our brain. They're processed in what's called the limbic system. And this is known as the emotional brain. It's very, very deep, instinctual, instinctive. Like I smell that my first elementary school, my only elementary school. I go in there and it conjures up memories. Those memories are going to be stimulated by this part of the brain. Very deep, very primitive brain. Emotions are going to be kept in this area of the limbic system. Memory is going to be mediated throughout the brain, the prefrontal cortex. That's where our reasoning comes from, our judgment. There's something called the cingulate gyrus. It's just above your corpus callosum, and that's going to help modify your behavior. Can I do something? And the hippocampus is very key in the maintenance of memories as well. Long-term memories are stored within the hippocampus. So emotions, limbic system, hippocampus, memory. Sensory pathways within the central nervous system, you just need to know that they are descending pathways. I'm sorry, strike that, completely wrong. Reverse that. Sensory pathways within the brain are going up. They're ascending. It's information coming in to the nervous system. So that's going to be drawn from our senses. It's going to be mediated in the cord. There are going to be different tracts that we see here in green that are going to move throughout the cord. The relay stations bounce around, hit the thalamus, and then be processed in the cerebrum itself. There's the homunculus again. If it's sensory and I stimulate this area of your cerebral cortex, your nose will itch. Within the medulla oblongata, or the brain stem, sensory information that's coming in, of course, is afferent. It's ascending, going into the brain, going into the nervous system. It's going to cross here. We call that a decussation. Decussation of the pyramids. The pyramids are structures, nervous structures within the medulla. So there's a decussation of the nerves within that area, crossing to the different sides of the brain. We said that the left hemisphere is going to control, mediate structures on the right side of the body, and vice versa. So because they cross, it's because they cross right here at the decussation in the medulla. Motor pathways are descending. So here we've got information having been processed and integrated, sensory information being integrated throughout our processor, our cerebral cortex, sends an information down, says, I want to lift this weight. It's going to, faster than you could think about it, perform that action. Hey, I want to lift this, I want to take a walk in the park. Nerves are activated, muscles are fired, or are stimulated, and they contract, and that's how it happens. That's a descending pathway. The principle of the final common path involves the nervous system stimulating muscles. Somatic motor pathways, somatic means body, involve the one common path, where the motor neuron, or the nerve cell, from the anterior aspect of the spinal cord is going to transmit impulses to skeletal muscles. So for the final common path, you need to know nerves powering muscles. That's what the final common path has to do with. Corticospinal, the pyramids are corticospinal tracts. So it's descending information, cortex to the spine, sending information down. It's motor information. Something's going to be triggered to happen. The motor program is going to be coordinated commands that, it's basically muscle memory. All the activities of daily living that you engage in are made possible by your motor program. And these are all the structures, a schematic of all the structures that link up to make it happen. The cerebral cortex, or the brain, is going to interact with these deep nuclei within here, and the thalamus is a relay station, and the cerebellum gives information on postural control and balance, and reflex sensors in the brainstem transmitted to the cord, interneurons relay within the cord, anterior horn motor neurons, nerves that power muscles, motor program. Final common path is a nerve powering a muscle. When we're born, we're like little sponges. We suck all kinds of information in and activities, thinking, doing, interacting, experiencing. Our brains get bigger, our synapses get stronger, there's more myelin produced to surround those nerves, make them conduct faster, and we have an ability to reinforce synapses and grow our nerves throughout life. But inevitably, as with all cells and all parts of the human body, nothing is forever, and our nervous system can start to decline, and we can experience diseases as those nerve cells lose their function and the structure deteriorates. Here's a slide talking about the different levels of development. At 3 weeks, the fetus looks like that. Gets a little bit bigger, 4 months, starting to look like a brain. Wrinkles, more wrinkles, lots of wrinkles. And we all are familiar with the rites of passage of newborns. feeding, crawling, standing, walking, experiencing everything. They're like sponges, and as they experience, the connections grow. By late adulthood, the nervous system starts to decline. Diseases can occur. We have a picture of the heart here. Because the circulation that the heart makes possible, blood pumping all throughout, is very crucial. So if we exercise, we have an efficient, elastic circulatory system, and all cells require blood and oxygen to maintain life and heal themselves. So if we have clots and plaques within your arterial system, your plumbing basically, that's called atherosclerosis, or hardening of the arteries, bad things can happen. And you can have the area of disease within the brain, and then the function from that area will suffer. Cerebral palsy is a disease that strikes in early life due to some sort of brain damage. There's permanent and non-progressive damage to motor control areas of the brain. There is a lot of impairment in motor control. So there will be spastic paralysis where muscles will just be contracted. A lot of muscle contractions and rigidity, difficulty walking, performing movements. Dementia, fall, and in elderly folks, people even earlier than that, certain disease processes can cause neurons to die. And when the structure declines, the function will decline with that. They'll lose their personality, their ability to process things, remember stuff, and take care of themselves. Very sad. Alzheimer's disease. There are lesions that develop within the cerebral cortex, and it can happen mid-life to the adult years. Here's an example of the plaques that form, and they get in the way and impede the progress of our neurons and support cells at a rate faster than we can fix them. Causes the brain to shrink. The brain tissue shrinks, the structure deteriorates, the function deteriorates. Huntington's disease, very sad. Okay, this is a genetic disease. There's involuntary movements that you're not controlling yourself, but you make all these funky dance moves that are when you don't want to dance. So it looks very uncomfortable and debilitating. They isolate a protein called Huntington, the Huntington protein. AIDS. AIDS can cause dementia. Human acquired immune deficiency syndrome is the progression from HIV, human immunodeficiency virus. So there's progressive degeneration of the brain in this case, and that's going to result in dementia. So deterioration of the structure, causing a resultant deterioration of function. Seizures. Told you guys about my buddy who used to pass out in the anatomy lab when we're dissecting cadavers, something about the embalming fluid. Okay, what happens is he had sudden bursts of abnormal neuron activity, and it just kind of shuts the brain down. So he would fall to the ground, usually wouldn't hurt himself, like he could anticipate it coming, and he would find a good safe landing place, and he would lay there and he would flop around for a couple minutes and then get up like nothing happened. So they can be very dangerous. People can hurt themselves during seizures, and it's very hard to watch. They can become progressive. There's different grades of seizures that we need to be aware of, and there are certain treatments that can be provided medically, medications to prevent them. And an electroencephalography, or an EEG rather, okay, is how you test for brain waves. So A normal EEG or electroencephalography is going to look a little bit like this little scribble. And if a person is experiencing seizures, when they have one, you'll see all these nerve impulses firing like that, all these funky brain waves like that. So we don't want that to happen. So this is an EEG is one way we can, if somebody's experiencing seizures or some sort of brain disease, we can set them up for an EEG and determine the precise nature of their dysfunction.